SpaceX is gearing up for Starship Flight 10 at breakneck speed, with Ship 36 appearing to be ready much earlier than we originally expected. Furthermore, some intriguing mystery components have been spotted, as SpaceX is rapidly closing in on finishing the construction of the very first Block 3 Starship Super Heavy booster, plus our current best guess as to when Flight 10 will happen. Howdy Star Partners, I'm Jack Beyer for NSF, and this is your Starbase Update. Throughout both this week and last week, we've observed as SpaceX continued to remove single-ring barrels from the Starfactory for what appears to be scrapping. After all, they're being moved over to the Sanchez lot where there are multiple scrapyards. Now, this could be related to the calibration of new tooling or new welding stations. When you install new equipment, you want to be able to test it out first. Or it could be something else entirely. These barrels are usually carefully measured and examined before they're officially commissioned for use on vehicles. So perhaps there was a problem with the production workflow that ended up compromising a number of barrel sections? My guess is that it's the former, some sort of tooling calibration. But we'll probably never really know for sure. Either way, after seeing multiple of these being removed over a short period, it's worth discussing. Also, shout out to the stainless steel only dumpster that rolled up to the production site on Friday. Something tells me it's going to get filled up with a whole bunch of scrap Starship parts. That trend continued on Tuesday as yet another barrel was moved over to the Sanchez site, likely to be scrapped. Another possible theory is that SpaceX is currently working out the tooling for Block 3 Starship, and maybe these are some failed test pieces used while getting that tooling calibrated. Or perhaps it's something, again, completely different. These could be rings that were built, inspected, and failed, and so they're just going to get scrapped. SpaceX is constantly making significant changes between vehicle blocks, so modifications to tooling setups are not just possible, but highly likely as part of that ongoing evolution. Behind Starfactory, SpaceX is also working on a new extension building that is being physically attached to the side of the main Starfactory structure. The current belief is that this addition might be related to an integrated bakery, and no, not the kind that produces bread. SpaceX bakes the heat shield tiles used for the exterior of Starship, and as of now, that process takes place in one of the few remaining tent facilities that is not yet integrated into the main Starfactory. So, this new construction will represent a significant step toward further consolidating these manufacturing efforts into one massive, centralized complex, especially as the Starfactory building appears to be progressing steadily closer to full completion. Speaking of things progressing closer to completion, the new sidewalk, bike lane, whatever you want to call it, running alongside Highway 4 is also rapidly taking shape as construction of it continues. At this point, they've reached all the way to Starhopper, starting from around the LBJ Highway 4 intersection, which means it's only a matter of time until there is an unbroken sidewalk all the way from the village to the launch site. How cool is that? Over at the Giga Bay construction area, bright lights are being installed to support upcoming night shifts as SpaceX appears to be gearing up to operate around the clock. The company is pushing forward with 24/7 efforts on the construction of the Starbase Giga Bay, signaling a strong commitment to accelerating the build-out of this critical infrastructure. Multiple sections of the site are already marked off, with sheet piles placed in those areas as SpaceX transitions into the groundwork and foundation preparation phase for the Giga Bay construction. This stage, based on past observations, can take a significant amount of time, sometimes even stretching across several months due to the particularly challenging soil conditions here in Boca Chica. The ground here is extremely sandy, often quite wet, and generally lacks any sort of natural stability, which makes it difficult to build on. Therefore, properly preparing this terrain to support a structure as massive and heavy as the Giga Bay is not only essential, but absolutely critical for long-term success. Once the new pile driver eventually moves away from the site, it will be a clear sign that the foundation prep phase has been completed. After that, construction will proceed step by step, but this process will take considerable time. A large portion of the former high bay footprint, parts of the ring yard, and the entire stretch toward the parking garage will all require extensive groundwork and stabilization. Given the size and scope of the area involved, this preparation phase is not a quick and dirty thing to do, and every section must be thoroughly ready before any further building begins. As expected, on Friday it seems that SpaceX is once again preparing to dewater the ground surrounding the Giga Bay Foundation, a step we've observed many times before during previous phases of construction. Boca Chica's proximity to the ocean means that the area is quite often essentially flooded or at least saturated with water, so making sure that the foundation is properly dried out and stabilized is usually an important and necessary first step of the overall construction process. On Thursday, we were treated to quite an impressive lightning spectacle as a large and powerful thunderhead approached the Starbase facility. This dramatic natural event was visible on multiple cameras stationed around the site, providing a stunning and electrifying show for storm chasers and rocket enthusiasts alike. Over at the Massey Outpost, we observed testing of the Booster 18.1 test tank over the course of the last week. However, it appeared that during that initial testing phase, the test tank was not fully connected to all the hydraulic rams and was simply subjected to a series of preliminary cryogenic tests first. Maybe they're just trying to establish a set of baseline values or control values. The situation now seems to be changing though. As you can see here, the diagonal rams that extend into the test article through those ports a bunch of people thought were human landing system related, they're not, have now been fully installed and attached. These pistons will be used to test the header tank located inside the test tank and to put stress on its welds. This testing setup is designed for a newer design iteration that will be implemented on Booster 18. At the top of the tank, the can crusher cap has been installed, and you can clearly see the vertical rams also connected directly to the cap. Meanwhile, workers are actively working on top of the test tank, specifically around the pressure release valve. This top opening plays a crucial role in controlling the pressures inside of a test tank. These tanks are pressurized mostly by warming up the liquid nitrogen that's pumped inside. During testing, they'll close all the valves tightly, and since liquid nitrogen is extremely cold, it quickly warms up once sealed inside the tank, causing the pressure to steadily increase. When the desired design pressure levels are reached, operators then open the test tank valves and securely and safely release that buildup pressure. It also looked like some additional valve hardware and associated plumbing was being installed on top of the test tank on Monday. It's unclear whether that's a fix to an inadequate or broken setup or just necessary equipment for the next stage of testing. This assembly was carefully lowered into place, and I could almost swear I saw one of the workers give the plumbing a few slaps once it was installed and detached from the crane. I of course imagined them saying to themselves, yeah, that ain't going nowhere. Over at the launch mount for Pad 2 at Starbase, work is still ongoing to weld the massive structure firmly into place. At the same time, efforts are focused on properly protecting it against the intense heat and flames generated by 33 Raptor engines. Additional steel plates designed for heat and fire protection are being transported to both the gantry and the pad, where they're actively being installed to close off and reinforce various areas. Inside the gantry, work is continuing to hook up all the necessary plumbing and electrical connections, SpaceX again wasting no time in their efforts to get the gantry and its systems fully online. Remember, this area has several critical functions. It will manage the propellant flow for the booster on Pad 2, along with supplying other necessary commodities to the vehicle. In addition to fuel control, the gantry will also handle electrical connections, data transmission, and many other critical systems. Of course, not everything is fully hooked up yet, which explains why we continue to see regular deliveries of pipes arriving on site. Here, for example, we can observe some giant pipes specifically intended for Pad 2 being rolled down carefully towards the launch pad, ready to be installed as part of the ongoing construction and hookup process. Another very critical component that had been missing until recently was the Pad 2 launch mount manifold, a key part expected for the deluge system. This important piece arrived on a truck this past Tuesday and was carefully rolled down Highway 4 toward the launch site. This giant manifold will play a crucial role in redistributing water from the main deluge system pipe out to all of these smaller connections, ensuring effective water flow during launch operations and fire suppression. Once it arrived on site, the massive manifold was carefully lifted off the truck by a crane and initially stored next to the pad. This placement's probably a temporary staging area as crews prepare for its installation onto the mount at a later time. Last week, we covered a lot of information about Space Launch Complex 37, the newest Starship launch pads being developed on the East Coast. If you happen to miss that update, I highly recommend checking out last week's coverage for all the details and insights. While SpaceX still needs to complete some additional regulatory paperwork before construction can officially begin, demolition work started this week. The old Delta facility was taken down using explosive devices, making another significant sign that the era of Delta heritage has come to an end. This Mobile Service Tower, or MST, which was once used to assemble and operate the Delta IV Heavy and Delta IV Medium rockets on the East Coast, has now been demolished to make room for SpaceX. The clearing of this pad is an essential step before SpaceX can fully move in and begin constructing all of the new infrastructure we discussed last week. It's pretty wild to see Starship changing the skylines not just here in Starbase, but in Florida as well. NSF team member and photographer extraordinaire Max Evans boarded a helicopter to capture aerial shots of the demolition's aftermath. You can clearly see that there's a lot of cleanup left to be done following the demolition, but that's the point of an explosive demolition, right? You put it down fast, and then it's just all easy cleanup. We will, of course, continue to track this progress and much more through Space Coast Live, along with our upcoming flyovers of the Florida Space Coast. Before we move on to the construction and testing of the next Starship vehicles, let's take a quick McGregor Minute to review the recent status of Raptor engine testing at SpaceX's McGregor, Texas facility. Between Monday the 9th and Friday the 13th, SpaceX was incredibly busy conducting Raptor tests. In total, they completed 30 Raptor engine tests during that short time frame, which is quite an impressive number, especially considering that just the previous week featured 20 tests. Some of these tests were notably long, including a 212-second test on the Raptor vertical test stand, followed by another 367-second test on the same stand. But as you probably know, when you test engines this intensively and this much, sometimes failures happen. One of the more spectacular failures in recent history occurred during a Raptor engine test when one engine appeared to become unstable and effectively barfed out its internal components. You can clearly see the dreaded green flash, something you never want to witness during a Raptor test, as it typically indicates engine-rich combustion. Following that, sparks flew around the engine area, so it's likely we won't see this particular engine make it onto a vehicle anytime soon. Or ever. As always, this could have been an intentional test to destruction, though we'll likely never know for sure. You can watch this and much more on McGregor Live, our 24/7 live stream of SpaceX's engine testing facility in McGregor, Texas. Alright, let's talk upcoming vehicles. Peeking inside Mega Bay 2, the most prominent Starship we can see at all times is whichever one is on the center stand. And right now, that's Ship 38. Considering this ship is currently expected to fly sometime in August or September, SpaceX still has a lot of work left to do on the heat shield and overall fit and finish of the vehicle. However, we've also seen Starships in even rougher condition just 2 to 3 months before their flights. It's possible that this ship is currently in a bit of a holding phase as SpaceX waits on re-entry data from a version 2 ship and a current iteration heat shield so they can understand what still needs fixing. Peeking inside Starfactory, we can also see another header tank and nose cone being constructed for a Starship, and it appears that just to the right of it, another one is in progress as well. These tips belong to ships that are well into the Block 3 phase of the program, and are likely intended for ships numbered in the 40s. Once again, Starfactory is enormous, and most of the time, we only get to see the parts that are right up next to the windows, and not all of the other stuff going on inside the factory. Really, just the stuff in front of the windows is sort of a final bit before the stacking process. Tracking the progress of Ship 39, we can see that it's currently in what I like to call the hedgehog phase of construction, during which tile pins are carefully installed in preparation for the final attachment of thermal blankets and heat shield tiles. But SpaceX again still doesn't have re-entry data on a version 2 ship, so wow. Talk about a hedgehog dilemma. However, it is worth noting that this process might still evolve, as Ship 39 is expected to be the very first Block 3 Starship vehicle. Therefore, we'll need to keep a close eye on it to ensure that SpaceX is not unexpectedly changing or updating the construction process right under our noses. Right under our nose cones? The robot used to perform this delicate work is, by the way, this impressive piece of machinery right here. It will operate on the nose section of the Starship and carefully set the pins for the thermal protection system, welding them to the walls of the spacecraft with precision. For this process, the nose section of the Starship sits on a rotating stand that can turn the nose whenever the robots or workers need access to a different area. This system makes it much easier to reach various sections without having to constantly move all the work platforms around to a needed spot. You can actually see the nose cone rotating from time to time during the construction process. Alright, it's time for NSF to bring back the classic mystery object disclaimer, because SpaceX has once again left us scratching our heads. This time it involves Booster 18. In the middle of the night, a mysterious object was quietly rolled out from Starfactory to Mega Bay 1, completely covered in a red tarp. However, we do have some educated guesses about what this enigmatic item might be. Looking at the current building status of Booster 18, it's nearing completion of its aft section. The object spotted here roughly matches the shape and size of what could be a newly designed booster landing tank. Since designs often evolve between boosters, this longer, narrower object could very well represent an updated landing tank. Once the final thrust section quad moves into place, this header tank might be installed onto the aft section before it's stacked with the rest of the LOX tank. While this is purely speculative at this point, it provides a plausible explanation for what we've observed during this recent movement. Speaking of Booster 18, the final quad of the LOX section also rolled out on the same night. Once this quad is stacked, all the major sections of the LOX tank will be complete except for the final aft section. At present, the LOX section consists of the midsection plus 5 quads, each made up of 4 rings. That's why they're called quads. This means Booster 18 currently stands at 23 rings tall. It will be joined by an additional 2 rings on the aft section, which will bring the total height of the entire LOX area plus thrust section to 25 rings. The methane section will then be composed of 2 quads and 1 final triple ring, with the integrated hot staging ring we saw during Elon Musk's recent presentation just a few few weeks ago. This brings the methane section to a total of 11 rings, and when combined with the 25 rings of the LOX section, the entire booster will stand at approximately 36 rings tall. Overall, this makes the new booster design about 1 ring taller than before, but the actual usable surface area for tanking space compared to space allocated for other components will improve significantly, especially with the complete redesign of both the aft section, which no longer includes any shielding, and the forward section featuring the integrated ring. A lot of mass is going to be saved, and of course, much more tanking space will be gained. Thanks to SpaceX for leaving the door to Mega Bay 1 open during the stacking process, we were even able to observe the stacking of that massive structure in action. You can clearly see how the giant booster section is moved over to the parked ring, where SpaceX then welds the two sections firmly together. Once this welding process is completed, the booster is moved back to its dedicated workstation on the side of the Mega Bay. SpaceX consistently performs this maneuver with every single stack of the booster, ensuring precision and efficiency throughout the assembly. Before we go into detail about the preparations for Starship Flight 10, we want to let you know that our Flight 9 patch for Starship is now shipping. And we still have a few more units left that you can order at shop.nasaspaceflight.com if you still don't have it in your collection. Remember, once it's sold out, it's sold out. That's it. And hey, while you're at it, why not pick up a few of our celebratory shirts we released after Ship 35 reached SECO again? And now, back to Flight 10. Yes, Pad 1 was able to support a static fire test last week, but that does not mean it's fully operational or ready for an actual launch just yet. In this shot, you can see workers inspecting the shielding located above the chopsticks, which protect the more critical components inside the tower, such as the piping for the ship, against the enormous launch forces generated by the super heavy booster. While this shielding is not strictly necessary during a static fire because the booster is securely contained on the launch mount, it becomes absolutely critical once the booster lifts off during an actual launch. On Friday, it looked like the booster quick disconnect still needed some more work, as SpaceX was performing repairs following the last flight still. However, these repairs seem to be nearing completion, which would most likely clear the path for an upcoming flight, at least from a ground support equipment perspective. On Tuesday, we also got a brief glimpse of our next Starship Flight vehicle. Don't focus on the ship in the middle, that's still Ship 38. Instead, look to the left side, where you can clearly see the mostly complete heat shield of Ship 36. This ship is currently planned to fly on Flight 10 of Starship, which is expected in maybe a week or two from now. Who knows? It's always challenging to get good shots of Ship 36 because it's stored on the left side of Mega Bay 2, partially obscured. However, from what we can observe here, it appears mostly ready for its upcoming campaign with only a few minor sections left to be covered. While these photos were taken, it appeared that a cherry picker was actively working on the nose of Ship 36, likely performing some additional work on the tiles and heat shield in that area. Although there wasn't anything earth-shattering to spot, it's always good to check in on the progress of the ship when the door to Mega Bay 2 is open, to keep track of any updates or changes we can spot. Meanwhile, on Thursday, we observed Booster 16 waiting inside Mega Bay 1. This booster is most likely not the critical pacing item on the road towards Flight 10, and with its static fire test now successfully completed, it only requires final inspections, followed by installation of its hot staging ring and flight termination system to be fully ready for flight. Therefore, a rollout of Booster 16 would provide a strong indication that SpaceX is committing to a flight very soon. Then, late in the week, we received an announcement from the city of Starbase that piqued everyone's interest. There's a scheduled road delay affecting Highway 4 from the production site to Massey Outpost, expected either on Saturday between midnight and 2 a.m. or alternatively between noon and 4 p.m. Turns out the ship actually ended up rolling on Sunday, but that means we got a beautiful daylight roll. Ship 36 rolling out for a static fire is a clear signal that we're entering a rapid phase of activity here. Ship 35's last test occurred just 5 days before its flight, so once Ship 36 is at Massey's and has completed a successful static fire and then comes back to the production site, we might be looking at less than a week until flight. Potentially. Indeed, on Monday, Ship 36 went into testing already. After the ship was placed at the Massey Outpost on Sunday, SpaceX was really eager to test. After what appears to be an aborted test early in the morning with the tank farm spooled up, SpaceX then started to fuel a rocket shortly after noon, and performed what appeared to be a single-engine static fire, mimicking the deorbit burn of the ship in space. This burn in the past was conducted to increase confidence in being able to always deorbit the ship safely, and is a test we have seen in the past many times. Next up, most likely in the coming days, will be a 6-engine static fire test. But remember, this 6-engine test is also the one where they have had issues on the past with ship, and which delayed the launch by about 2 weeks after multiple repeated issues appeared. So, fingers crossed, this time everything will be clean. Now, let's turn to the regulatory side, since there are still some minor hurdles that need to be addressed. In an official statement released by the FAA, it was announced that the Flight 8 mishap investigation has been fully closed. Just to clarify, Flight 8, not Flight 9. Previously, this investigation had been postponed temporarily through a safety determination, which allowed SpaceX to return to flight operations without waiting for full closure of that investigation. However, the investigation into Flight 8 is now complete, confirming what SpaceX had already indicated. The probable root cause of the failure of Ship 34 was traced to a hardware malfunction on one of the Raptor engines, which resulted in inadvertent mixing and ignition of propellant inside the engine. To address this, SpaceX has identified and committed to implementing 8 corrective actions designed to prevent a similar failure from occurring in the future. Moving forward, we've already witnessed Flight 9, the very next flight after Starship Flight 8. The mishap investigation into Flight 9 remains open at this time, and SpaceX will either need a full closure of that investigation, or more likely, a safety determination from the FAA before it can return to flight operations. Until that regulatory approval is obtained, no flights related to Flight 9's mission can commence. That said, SpaceX is not yet ready to pursue that clearance either, so it's probable that this ongoing investigation will not be the pacing item holding back the launch schedule. Instead, we expect to see the relevant regulatory paperwork drop around the time the upcoming static fire test is completed successfully. So when the heck is Flight 10 going to be? My best guess is sometime around the end of the month is fairly likely, but what are your thoughts? Are you still thinking about a June launch, or do you think we've slipped into July at this point? Given the recent pace SpaceX has been maintaining, it really is starting to seem plausible that a launch in June is not out of the question. But we'd love to hear your predictions in the comments below. Feel free to also share your guesses for Flight 11 and Flight 12. I think we easily see both of those before the end of the year. As always, thanks for watching, and don't forget, be excellent to each other.